How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the Xenomorph and got harem? Part 1. Huge shout out to Sol Winterfang71 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Prologue. Oh god, Sarutobi Hiruzen whispered with horror, disgusted in his old rival beyond what he had been prior. Having finally found a piece of hard evidence against Danzo, the Sandaime had led an aggressive and offensive investigation against the old warmongering councilman, eventually getting enough evidence to lead a raid on the man's facilities. Among them was a laboratory hidden deep within the Hokage monument. After infiltrating the place with several dozen Anbu and a handful of Jounin the Hokage had hand-picked for the operation, they struck, arresting those they could and killing those they couldn't. Several of them had committed suicide, biting down on a poison tooth to end their lives before they could be questioned. But that wasn't what sickened the professor. It was the occupant of the liquid-filled glass obelisk set before him. Appearing to be between the ages of 4 and 6, the childlike figure had a strangely natural-looking lean and muscular build, if not a bit lanky, with oily black skin and very few facial features. No eyes, no visible ears, no nose, only the smooth curvature of their black-skinned skull, with an oxygen mask apparatus covering their mouth. His hands bore a set of 2 thumbs with one on either side of the appendages, short black claws on each digit that looked to be more than sharp enough to rend flesh with ease. His legs were digitigrade like those of an animal whose feet bore permanently raised heels and linked soles, 3 toes armed with similar black claws, and a pair of opposable thumb-like two-claw toes, flanking either of his feet, halfway up his lengthened soles, that bore the same black claws as the rest of the digits. Glossy black exoskeletal plates made presumably of bone were scattered across his small young frame. From what could be seen, the bone plates adorned his forearms, chest, and parts of his legs like his thighs and shins. In the place of hair, what appeared to be more of the black exoskeletal plates were starting to form on his head in the place of hair follicles. Extending from the base of his spine was a skeletal tail, as long as his body that looked not unlike a grotesque spinal column in itself, that was tightly bound in the same oily black skin as the rest of his body, a short curved blade of bone adorning its tip that was no longer than the blade of a kunai. Is that can't be hot, Aki Kakashi muttered in shock as he approached, removing the dog mask from his face to see the person with both eyes. A clear hose reached down from the top of the tank, connecting with a translucent mask strapped over his mouth, obviously supplying him with oxygen. Naruto Hiruzen whispered, the utterance of the name acting almost as a cue for the figure to subtly twitch, their body tensing up slightly. Lips curling back slightly beneath the oxygen mask, Naruto slowly tilted his head up, as if to look at the pair of them, but didn't do anything else. Instinctually, Hiruzen knew that the figure in front of him was no longer the same child he had tasked himself with protecting, something he had failed to do in the most costly of ways. However, he refused to believe that it wasn't Naruto anymore. Silently, he looked down at the metal post that stood beside the tank, bearing a small computer screen and an assortment of buttons. Among them was a large red button covered with a clear glass box. Reaching out to the large red button that said release across it in bright yellow lettering and flipping open the clear plexiglass cover, Hiruzen suddenly hesitated, something that made Kakashi speak up. Hokage-sama, what are you waiting for? Let him out. Kakashi exclaimed, but the Sandaime glanced at him, a pleading look in his eyes as a tear slid down his cheek. What if he proves hostile? We would have no choice but to facing the creature once more. Sarutobi Hiruzen found himself unable to even say it, more tears falling from his eyes, his words silencing Kakashi. He had always seen Naruto as his surrogate grandson since before he had been born. To be forced to snuff out that precious flame of life would utterly destroy him. Stealing his resolve and closing his eyes, Sarutobi made his decision. Upon pressing the large button with his open hand, bright red light started flashing all across the room before the liquid in the tank gradually began to drain. Once his head broke the surface, Naruto pulled off the mask covering his featureless face, hissing quietly. As he was lowered down and stood on his own 2 feet, however, he was forced to brace himself against the glass lest he fall, unused to the action of standing or walking, due to his time in captivity being spent in the suspension of the liquid that was now drained from the tube. Letting out a quiet and breathy hiss again as the tube began to sink down into the floor, Naruto resigned to crouching down on all fours, keeping his body low and coiling his long tail around his body and limbs in an almost protective manner. Silently watching as the last of the glass container that housed him for the past couple years receded into the ground, Naruto slowly and cautiously looked up at the shinobi standing before him. Not exactly paying them any mind, he took notice of how they were standing on 2 legs before glancing down at himself, clad in only a pair of black shorts with a custom-tailored opening in the back for his tail that tied above it. Experimentally, Naruto decided to try the same, barely managing to get about halfway up before he lost his balance. His tail instantly shot around his body and impaled the metal-covered floor, the surprisingly powerful appendage supporting Naruto before he could fall. "He's trying to stand." Kakashi whispered with amazement, realizing that he was literally witnessing the first steps the once normal individual would take since being kidnapped by Danzo's root and thrown into captivity for experimentation, if not his very first steps in life. That was when the third individual in the room finally reacted to Naruto's presence as the child crouched back down on all fours. Genku Tensei, only 20 years old and an Anbu operative under Kakashi's command, stepped forward, removing her sheathed sword from her back before pushing the weapon into Kakashi's arms as she passed her superior, removing her mask as she walked up to Naruto. She didn't stop until Naruto's eyeless visage shot up to her face when she was no more than 5 feet from him, a quiet hiss slipping past his slightly curled lips to reveal his nearly translucent fangs. The others dared not say anything, lest they accidentally provoke him and cause something they would undoubtedly regret. "It's okay, I won't hurt you," Tensei whispered softly with a faint smile, slowly crouching down and holding her arms out to him as if to embrace him. Staring at the extended limbs for a moment, he slowly started to approach her, his arms and legs shaking slightly from the foreign activity. When he was close to her, Tensei slowly and carefully wrapped her arms around him, the contact making Naruto react instinctively by lunging forward slightly and wrapping his arms around her, clinging to her with his body resting on her right side and coiling his tail around her waist and himself like a safety line. Kakashi and Hiruzen could only watch with awestruck silence as Tensei slowly stood up, cradling him against her body with her right arm. HSSS letting out another quiet and breathy hiss, Naruto looked around slightly before suddenly feeling rather tired, the excitement of being awoken and released beginning to pass as the strange feeling of safety in the woman's arms washed over him. But the jaw-cracking yawn that revealed the sharp teeth in his mouth along with his 4 pairings of fang-like canines, Naruto closed his mouth before burying his face against the woman's shoulder. Smiling warmly at the child, Tensei gently brushed the backs of her fingers across his cheek, the mutated child nuzzling her hand ever so slightly in his exhausted state. "Did you just and did he?" Kakashi stammered quietly, unable to wrap his head around what had just happened. Sarutobi said nothing as he grabbed a forgotten white lab coat left behind by one of the staff members before wrapping it around Tensei and the young boy in her arms, wanting to avoid him being seen by anyone that shouldn't and causing problems. "With all due respect, hot Akitaichu, shut up," Tensei muttered before smiling down at Naruto again as the Sandai Ami led them out of the chamber and out of the facility. She didn't know what it was that provoked her. Maybe maternal instinct stirred from dormancy by the sight of the young boy. Whatever it was, Tensei felt a warm sensation fill her chest when Naruto jumped into her arms, and it only grew stronger every time she looked down at him. Despite the horrors committed upon the innocent child, Tensei could not stop herself from smiling at the sight of such childlike innocence on his peacefully sleeping face. Despite being the result of a madman's sick and twisted experiments and the container of the QB no Kitsune, Tensei could not stop herself from wanting to care for him, to raise him and teach him and be the mother he never had. Mother, Tensei suddenly thought with shock, her eyes widening slightly and cheeks burning brightly with a fierce blush. After a moment, she looked back down and couldn't help but smile as Naruto nuzzled her chest and gripped the top edge of her body armor in his slumber. A mother, huh? Well, I guess it's settled. "Don't worry, little Naruto," Tensei whispered under her breath to the pale-skinned body clinging to her body, gently brushing back his onyx hair with her free left hand. "Mommy's got you." As if hearing her words, Naruto held onto her a little tighter, his tail lightly constricting her waist as he nuzzled her shoulder again. "Naruto, can you say that?" Tensei inquired as Naruto sat in her lap at a desk as she tried to teach him how to speak, his tail wrapping around her waist. "Can you say Naruto?" Naruto was quiet for a few moments before trying to repeat what the woman had said, his voice quiet with a slight hissing undertone. "Naruto. Very good." Tensei praised as she leaned down and gently kissed the top of the boy's head. Confused by the foreign action, Naruto looked up at her, while Tensei could only smile at him with warmth. Pointing at him, she repeated the word. "Naruto." "Naruto," he reiterated quietly, making Tensei smile again. It had only been 3 days since she had taken him from the laboratory and adopted him as her son. In that time, Naruto showed an incredibly high level of intelligence for his age and a very sharp learning curve. She had been teaching him how to talk for only 2 days now. Yesterday, he could barely utter a single syllable, but now he was starting to progress into saying words with clarity, albeit a little slow, but words nonetheless. However, he was still having trouble getting used to walking, both on his hands and feet as well as just on his feet, so Tensei had taken to carrying him around most of the time. "Now, can you say mama?" Tensei inquired while pointing to herself as Naruto continued to stare up at her. "Mama." Mama, Naruto mimicked, struggling a little at first, but succeeding. Tensei suddenly felt her heart flutter at the word as she was filled with a great maternal warmth, making her smile more happily and wrap Naruto up in a loving embrace, cradling his head against her bosom to keep him from seeing her tears. They were of joy and only a couple, but she didn't want to worry him over nothing. Reacting instantly, Naruto wrapped his arms around her as best as he could, nuzzling her chest slightly, knowing he was safe so long as he was in her arms. Mama, Naruto muttered into her chest, forcing Tensei to choke back a slight sob as she smiled all the more. Do I have to? The young boy questioned, his soft-spoken voice holding a slight tone of hesitance. In 1 year, 7-year-old Naruto had learned how to be a normal person. He learned how to read, write, talk, walk, run. He was even taught some minor taijutsu to help refine his already instinctual and reflexive natural fighting ability. His mother had even helped him unlock his chakra a few weeks ago and had begun teaching him how to control it better by doing a set of exercises taught to him by his mother. Yes, Naru-chan. Attending the academy will help you grow stronger and help you learn how to control that strength. If not for that, then do it for me. Please. Tensei replied, kneeling before her adopted son and smiling warmly. Unable to resist, Naruto nodded a little shyly, making Tensei smile happily and hug him with a tender kiss on his forehead before releasing him and leading him out of their small home set in a secluded and wooded area within Konoha's walls, his body shrouded in a baggy black cloak with a hood pulled over his head and a white featureless hunter nin-style mask over his face. A little unusual for a child to wear, but it was better than people freaking out over his appearance. Grasping his mother's hand as they walked, Naruto couldn't help feeling out of place, having always found the shadows welcoming. The darker the shadow, the more comfortable he felt. Tensei noticed this and frowned slightly. I know you don't like it, Naru-chan, but you have to get used to it someday. At least as a shinobi, you won't have to be so exposed all the time. Standing at 5'8" with a lithe and slender figure, 21-year-old Genku Tensei had raven black hair streaked with natural blonde highlights and pulled back into a low ponytail that reached down to her slim waist, her skin being the color of light cream, while her eyes were an exotic and dazzling golden yellow. Like usual, she was dressed in a black kimono with golden trimming along the edges of the fabric with a stylized sun image decorating the left sleeve of the kimono in the form of golden embroidery. I know, but still I just don't like the light for some reason, Naruto murmured quietly, feeling a little ashamed about it since he knew his mother didn't like it when he always hid in the shadows. It was just natural for him, though. Noticing his unease, Tensei squeezed his hand reassuringly, giving him a loving smile as he looked up at her. Unable to stop himself, Naruto smiled slightly under his mask. However, it worked. He wasn't feeling ashamed anymore. Tensei could only imagine the trouble he would soon end up causing her. Prakum. HSSS. 8-year-old Naruto hissed quietly and a little fearfully, clinging to his mother's side on the couch. Tensei could only smile faintly, holding him against her as it continued to storm outside. It had started up in the middle of the night and the thunder disturbed Naruto's slumber, prompting him to sneak into her room and curl up beside her, accidentally waking her up. Now, she sat in the living room with him, trying to keep him calm. As it turned out, he didn't like thunder very much. Not one bit, actually. SHH, mom is here, Naru-chan. Tensei hushed gently, pulling him into her lap fully and holding him close while gently brushing a hand over his head. The bony growths on his head were slowly starting to form a shallow backswept carapace of sorts, but it didn't look like it would ever get much bigger, proportionally. Like always, Naruto wrapped his arms around his mother as much as he could, his tail wrapping around her waist. As another flash of lightning was answered with a crack of thunder, Naruto buried his face against Tensei's chest, shivering slightly. Mom is here, baby, it'll be alright. Very good, Naru-chan. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Tensei gushed as she hugged her son, making the now 11-year-old Naruto grimace faintly at the praise. He had just finished learning the Kage Bunshin technique, being unable to perform the basic Bunshin technique due to his abnormally large chakra reserves. No matter how much he practiced his chakra control, it was virtually impossible for him. Normally, such a technique was practically forbidden to be taught to someone that wasn't at least being promoted to Jounin, let alone still attending the academy, but the Sandai Ami had been the one to offer the technique after hearing of Naruto's problem. Beaming with pride, Tensei pulled a scroll out of her pocket and handed it to Naruto, who seemed a little curious, looking it over in his hands. It's 2 new techniques that use a variation of the Kage Bunshin. One of them is called Shuriken Kage Bunshin, and the other is Kunai Kage Bunshin. I've got a present for you, but you'll only get it once you finish learning these techniques. Okay. Hi. Naruto answered with a slight smile, wanting to make his mother proud of him. Interesting, Naruto murmured to himself, now 13 years old, was busy staring at his back in the mirror. During the night as he slept, he had suddenly started shedding for what seemed like the 100th time in the past year. Well, he wasn't looking forward to handling his own old skin for cleanup, he was just glad it was all in one piece, it made it so much easier. With each set of skin that he shed, he usually just grew a little bigger, but this time, he had developed a set of 4 protrusions on his back with 2 on either side. The top pair jutted out just below his shoulder blades and centered on either side, either one being roughly a foot long and looking not unlike a stretched out shaped tube of some sort. The bottom pair, resting only a few inches lower and closer to his spine, were almost identical to the top pair, only they were about 5 or 6 inches long. All 4 were pressed flat against his back, following the curvature of his spine, and appearing almost as if they were merely distended ridges on his back. Uo-tensei whined quietly with worry as she stood with her son, staring at them. Touching one, Tensei quickly retracted her hand with a slight squeak of surprise when they all twitched slightly, lifting up from his back for a moment before settling back down. Getting an idea, Naruto concentrated on trying to move the muscles on his back, focusing primarily around the base of each protruding object. Hearing a gasp from his mother, Naruto looked behind him again, discovering that the tubes had indeed moved. They stuck almost straight out with an upward incline that left the tips of the top pair level with his shoulders, while the tips of the bottom pair were level with the bases of the top pair. He also discovered that he had a far more detailed image of the area around him in his mind's eye. Like usual, he could still experience what was on the other side of a wall without them, but his range was greater now and in much greater detail. Normally limited to a 20-foot radius, Naruto could now sense things as far as almost 100 feet, quite literally, 5 times the range he normally possessed. Very interesting, Naruto muttered to himself, not at all fazed. Relaxing the muscles in his back, the 4 protrusions instantly folded back down against his back, the motion catching his mother off guard and making her squeak with frightful surprise again. "Stop that. It's creeping me out," Tensei sputtered, flustered and unnerved by the strange bone-hard fleshy tubes sticking out of her baby's back. Just to be mean, Naruto made them twitch, only this time, Tensei fainted. "Mom?" Naruto quietly and curiously asked, finding her passed out on the floor behind him. Sighing, Naruto decided to stop tormenting her and kept them folded down on his back before reaching down and picking her up, carrying her over to the couch so that she could recover comfortably. As time passed, Naruto continued to grow in body, mind, heart, and skill. Due to the information stored in the laboratory Naruto had been found in being heavily encrypted, it took a great deal of time just to figure out what it was that had been bonded with Naruto's genetic code. As it turned out, Danzo had come across some sort of creature labeled simply as a Xenomorph, captured it, experimented on it, and had eventually spliced its DNA with Naruto's, just a week after the QB had been sealed within the newborn, having originally intended to place him en route after properly training him and nurturing him into Konoha's most powerful weapon. From the data left behind, they discovered that, according to the information, Xenomorphs were essentially an apex predator with near hyper-intelligence that gave that an insane learning curve. Their bodies automatically adapted to their environment, no matter what it was. Their blade-tipped tails, claws, and fangs were more than enough to kill almost anything they came across, but if they weren't, their blood alone was a dangerous weapon. Due to certain biochemicals they naturally produced in their bodies, their blood was highly acidic, capable of melting through almost anything. Even metal. It was also reported that they had a second mouth of sorts hidden within their jaws, though Naruto hadn't shown any sign of possessing one that they knew of. This proboscis-like tongue was what they used for both feeding and, strangely enough, killing in addition to their claws and tail barb. The muscles and jaw-like bones in the anatomical part were strong enough to punch through bone and even thin pieces of metal. Just like Naruto, however, they didn't have any visible eyes or any other apparent sensory organ, apart from the nerves in their skin. But they did have a sort of omniscient sensory organ of some kind located in their brain directly behind the forehead that allowed them to see everything around them, much like the Byakugan, while their nervous system acted not as just a sensory receptor for touch, but also so that they could smell, hear, and even taste something to a certain degree. After some tests were done, it was discovered that Naruto had almost every single characteristic of a Xenomorph, with the only exception being the fact he was lacking the proboscis-like tongue. It had been discovered that while Naruto could only sense things like a Xenomorph, having developed the same omniscient sensory organ during the genetic bonding procedure performed upon him when he was just a baby, he was still capable of determining colors and even reading normally. Although lacking the proboscis, Naruto was, however, capable of lengthening and strengthening his tongue through the use of chakra, but he didn't use such a skill very much, having stated it was simply weird, even for him. During his time in the academy, Naruto had become something of a cross between being popular and an outcast amongst his peers and classmates, something that left him rather confused at times. And it was all because he had worn a baggy hooded black cloak over his body and a mask on his face since day one. His popularity only came from the mystery of his appearance. Now, 10 years after enrolling, 17-year-old Naruto was a genin, and the teams would be assigned in 2 days. Naruto couldn't wait to tell his mother that he had passed, that he was a genin, a shinobi. However, something wasn't right. Although he dismissed it as just being jittery and a little paranoid, Naruto's pace soon began to accelerate from a casual stroll through the streets as the sun neared its departure behind the horizon to a brisk walk, escalating further to a light jog, before eventually reaching a full-blown sprint. His senses were going crazy, his instincts screaming at him to get home, but alas. He was too late. No, he whispered under his breath as he came to a dead stop, his lips curling into a frantic snarl as he stared upon the flaming wreckage of what had been his home. Nothing more than smoldering ruins of charred wood now, Naruto started to shake as he fearfully and hesitantly approached what had once been the home of Genku Naruto and Genku Tensei. Humming to a stop where the front door would have been, Naruto saw the one thing he dreaded the most, cursing his lack of eyes for not being to shed a single tear over the horror he was witnessing. No, 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 no. This can't be real. Lying in the middle of what had once been the living room was his mother, her body burned to ash and bones scorched black. He knew it was her because the dimensions of her skeletal structure matched the dimensions of the skeleton before him. That, and the metal knee joint in her left leg confirmed it, having been seriously injured during a mission when he was 10, forcing her to retire for good. Naruto, someone spoke up from behind him, making Naruto whip around with feral anger, though it was barely suppressed by his more logical and rational side. Standing there was the Sandaime and 3 Anbu agents. The elderly man held the same look of shock, heartbreak, and pain as Naruto did, but only at a lesser degree. It was only natural, seeing as the woman had raised him since his genesis. "I'm so sorry, Naruto, we weren't fast enough. Who did this?" Naruto hissed, dropping his mask to the ground as he snarled at the Sandaime, baring his 8 fangs, as his sorrow quickly started giving way to his anger. Before the man could answer, Naruto detected the pheromones and scents of the party in question, their scent trails appearing in his mind's eye like lines of smoke. Without another word or warning of his intentions, Naruto pumped his legs full of chakra before taking off, his cloak left floating in the air, where he had been standing as he shot through the forest, following the trail of the men who killed his mother. HSSS. Hissing sharply as his lips curled in a vicious snarl, Naruto dropped to all fours, his speed jumping from mid-chunin to high jounin in an instant as he flooded his limbs and muscles with more chakra. Quickly breaching the clearing the 2 men were in, Naruto lunged, tackling the first one from behind as he gripped the man's shoulders with his double-thumbed hands and the man's hips with his clawed double-thumbed feet. Without hesitation, Naruto charged his tongue with chakra before opening his fang-filled mouth with a hiss, the organ darting forward at inhuman speeds and spearing through the back of the man's head, the back of his skull erupting in a burst of blood, bone fragments, and bits of brain matter as he was killed instantly. It all happened within 2 seconds. "Ah!" The other one screamed, redirecting Naruto's attention to him. Again, without hesitation, Naruto lunged at the man with a shrill and inhuman shriek as he tackled him to the ground, grabbing the sides of the man's head with his hands, jabbing his inner thumbs into the man's eyes, and ignoring his deafening cries of fear and pain, before squeezing his hands together as hard as he could. Swiftly and easily crushing the man's skull like a rotten melon between his palms. HSSSSSSSS Naruto hissed once more, though more placidly as he slowly started to calm back down, now that his mother's killers were dead. Standing up and staring down at their corpses with cold eyes, Naruto's appearance was finally made visible to the outside world for the first time, a cloud moving aside to let the full moon's pale illumination shine down on him, as if it were willed by the gods that he'd been seen in his dark and otherworldly glory. Standing at 6'3" with the same lean and muscular, yet lanky build he'd had since he was a child, Naruto had developed numerous exoskeletal plates of bone all over his body that partially mimicked his endoskeletal frame. Such as a pseudo-ribsage on his torso that further shielded his internal organs, while section plates covered his pectoral and abdominal muscles without limiting his range of movement. His limbs were plated similarly with segmented exoskeletal bones, with the exception of his joints. His hair had formed a solid crest-like carapace that extended behind his head by a few inches, his face still lacking any kind of features, apart from his mouthful of translucent fangs and sharp teeth. Like usual, Naruto was dressed in only a pair of black leggings that ended at his knees, with a tailor-made hole in the back for his tail, that tied together above the prehensile limb, a pair of dark gray satch-like pouches hanging from his belt at his hips that reached down to just above his knees, with a black strap reaching around his legs to keep them secured. And his Konoha hit-ia tied around his waist on a long strip of black cloth like a belt, while a 3-inch long hexagonal golden amber gem hung from a black cord looped around his neck, with a pair of thin 3-inch long metal rods flanking the crystal. It had been a birthday gift from his mother when he had turned 9. HSS hearing something behind him, Naruto slowly turned his head and looked over towards Sarutobi, who had just arrived with two of the Anbu, the third undoubtedly having been left behind at the crime scene. Once more, Naruto's lips curled in a faint snarl in the place of shedding tears, his face speckled with the blood of his kills. They killed her because of me. No, Naruto. No, they didn't. Look. Hiruzen tried to correct the newly graduated genin, pointing towards the two dead shinobi, bringing something to Naruto's attention. They were both from Iowa. Not Konoha. Virtually no one knew of Naruto's appearance, except for those that had been present when Naruto had been found and the Shinobi Council. Towards the end of the Third War, Tensei had graduated to Jounin at the age of 13, not unlike Kakashi-san. She was very skilled and had killed many Iowa shinobi because of that talent. However, it also painted a target on her back. After being forced to retire from Anbu, Tensei became comfortable with her life and settled down to raise you as a full-time mother. She let her guards slip and they finally managed to get her. You mean they've tried before? Naruto whispered harshly, his snarl worsening as he turned to face the Hokage fully. Why was I not told? Because this Hiruzen began to answer, gesturing towards the two dead bodies. Would have happened, only on a much worse scale, with casualties on both sides measuring in the hundreds, if not thousands. Naruto said nothing as he stared down at his hands, which were still covered in blood, pieces of bone, and brain matter. Without another word, Naruto bowed his head slightly and started walking towards them, only to pass them. As he neared the Sandaime, Hiruzen attempted to hand Naruto his cloak, only for him to glance at it and continue on his way, ignoring the article of clothing. Without stating why he didn't want it anymore, Naruto simply kept walking. He ignored the blood and gore drying on his hands as he walked, his head bowed and senses dulled so that he could only detect things within a 10-foot radius of him. He paid no mind to the night or the darkness. He cared not for the two Anbu tailing him, watching him from afar. What now? Naruto thought to himself, never noticing that he had autonomously made his way into Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death, by hopping the fence. Absently picking a tree, Naruto scaled its surface until he reached the top, perching himself on a branch and tightly coiling his tail around it to keep his balance. He didn't know what to do. Yes, he felt the heartbreak and grief of losing his mother, but it was more than that. There was an emptiness within him. As if something had been physically carved out of him and disposed of, never to be returned to him. Eyeless face blank with uncertainty, Naruto remained perched on the branch, unable to even think properly. What no one knew or understood was Xenomorph or Archie. Naruto, although only a hybrid, was still a Xenomorph by nature, and he had just lost his queen mother, the leader of his hive, his family the center of his world. Unlike other people, Naruto didn't cry or grieve the loss of his mother like what was to be expected, he couldn't cry anyways, even if he wanted to. He slowly entered a state of silent depression, appearing most accurately as being lost and without the guidance of his queen mother. What do I do now? Naruto asked himself once more, losing all sense of time as he sat there. Naruto stayed quiet, lurking in the back of the classroom as he stared down at the desk in front of him. He had forgone wearing his cloak once more, leaving himself completely visible to everyone, but their mutterings and whispers went unheard by the genin. Yesterday, Naruto had been paid a visit by Yamanaka Inoichi, and they had spent several hours simply talking. Well, Inoichi did. Naruto only spoke when he had to answer a question or explain something. Strangely enough, Naruto was found to be competent and stable, allowing him to remain as an active shinobi of Konoha. Freak. That word suddenly rang loud in his head, making Naruto's eyeless gaze slowly rise from the desk and lock onto the source, Uchiha Sasuke. Had it not been for him being unable to cast Genjutsu, Naruto would have been made the Rookie of the Year, not that he cared. Letting out a quiet and prolonged hiss, Naruto dug his claws into the desk in front of him and probably would have attempted a retaliation of some sort had it not been for the two people to sit down on either side of him. Glancing at the two, Naruto recalled their names in an instant. To his right was Aburami Shinobu, the Aburami heiress, and to his left was Hyuga Hayatari, the Hyuga heir. Standing at 5'4", 17-year-old Aburami Shinobu's black wavy hair was pulled back in a high ponytail that reached down to the middle of her back in pale porcelain skin, her eyes hidden by a pair of wraparound sunglasses. She was dressed in a black sleeveless turtleneck over a long-sleeve mesh top, black full-length pants, black Inoichi sandals, and a gray long-sleeve trench coat over everything that she kept closed at all times, with a high-raised collar that came to a stop in front of her nose, while her Konoha Hitai was tied around her forehead on a band of black cloth. Standing at 5'10", 17-year-old Hyuga Hayatari had dark indigo hair that he kept in an undershave, his chin-length bangs framing his face, while the rest of his hair tapered back until it was only about an inch long in the back. A thin 6-inch-long tightly woven braid hanging from the base of his hairline that terminated in a tuft of hair the length of his thumb that looked almost like the end of a paintbrush, which dangled directly between his shoulder blades. His skin was a bit pale as well, and his pupilless eyes were strangely a light shade of amethyst instead of the stark white like other Hyuga. He was dressed in a black long-sleeve top that hugged his upper body like a second skin, while the sleeves were baggy and hung down past his fingertips, a tan-colored body-hugging sleeveless hoodie that he kept zipped up all the way, and the hood tossed over his head, a black cloth face mask pulled up over his nose. Baggy black pants held up by a black belt and tucked into black knee-high combat boots, and his hit-eye worn around his neck on a band of black cloth. "Ignore them," Shinobu muttered quietly without glancing at him. Then again, it was a little difficult, even for him, to tell with her sunglasses on. Retaliation is illogical. It'll only make things worse. Shinobu-sen is right. Just let it go. You'll have your moment, but it won't be today. Hayatari added, glancing over at Naruto and giving the much taller male an eye smile. Just stay calm and don't let it bother you. Isn't that what you told me 7 years ago? Naruto stayed silent, only a little surprised by the change in Hayatari, who used to be incredibly shy and timid. He had once believed the Hyuga to be scared of virtually everything in existence until he found the male training quite fiercely in an isolated training ground. The look of determination in his eyes proved Naruto wrong. The next day, Naruto found Hayatari on the verge of a panic attack when some of the other males in their class started harassing the Hyuga simply because he liked gardening. Upon stepping up from behind Hayatari, the other boys got scared and ran off. Once they left, Naruto had told him those same words of advice before leaving. He never did pay any attention to the others, and because of that, Hayatari's calm and more confident behavior caught him off guard. Slightly. They stayed silent after that, waiting patiently for the teams to be called out. Having been sitting in his chair with it turned around, Naruto waited until Iruka had come in with the papers listing who would be on which team. At that moment, Naruto concentrated and raised his dorsal tubes, the mental image of the room becoming far more detailed, and after a few seconds of further concentration, Naruto managed to focus in on the sheet. He was idly surprised to find himself teamed up with the two sitting on either side of him, but it was to be expected. All three of them were skilled in tracking in one way or another, and they all shared relatively similar mentalities. With that knowledge in mind, Naruto lowered his dorsal tubes and relaxed his senses, deciding to go into a temporary hibernation. Simply put, he was going to take a nap of sorts. It would be some time before their sensei would arrive. He was curious of this Yuhi Kurenai. I wonder what she's like. It wasn't for almost an hour before the first of the Jounin sensei came to collect their teams. Stirring from his rest just as the door opened the first time, Naruto grimaced slightly and stretched in place, keeping his tail wrapped around his waist. Once he was fully awake, Naruto watched as one Jounin after another came and left with their students. Then came the 8th Jounin. She stood at about 5'5" with light-colored skin, deep crimson eyes, and black wavy hair that reached down to just below her shoulder blades. What he found most peculiar about her was the woman's choice in clothing. She was clothed in a fishnet top with no left sleeve and a baggy crimson right sleeve that ended at her wrist, while a dress of some sort covered her body, appearing to be white cloth wrappings, with a black thorny vine running along its full length, a set of shorts worn under the dress that were also primarily white cloth wrappings. Her hands and forearms were bound with more white cloth wrappings that left her fingers uncovered and black kunoichi sandals on her feet. Tied around her head was her konoha hit-eye on a band of black cloth. So, this is Yuhi Kurenai? Naruto mused idly, though with relative disinterest. I wonder how this will turn out. Teammate. Come with me, please. Kurenai spoke up, her eyes glancing over the people in the class until her students stood up. She was a little surprised to have Genku Naruto on her team, having heard of what happened to his mother. That, and his appearance. All she really knew of him was what the Hokage had told her of him, which included a reassuring warning, don't be afraid of him. He won't hurt you without provocation. I had thought the Sandaime was just joking, but now that I'm looking at him, Kurenai thought to herself, keeping from showing her emotions and thoughts as she led her team out of the academy and towards training ground 15. As they walked, Naruto concentrated for a moment before becoming aware of everything around him within a 20-foot radius. His target, however, was Kurenai. Detecting the pheromones coming off of her body and decrypting her body language, Naruto came to the conclusion that she was startled and unnerved by his presence, possibly even a little fearful. Strange. Aburami and Hyuga are not at all bothered by my appearance. Naruto mentally noted, checking his two teammates for their feelings toward him while he was at it. In fact, they seem rather relaxed. Unusual. The trip was a silent one and took only a few minutes before they came to a stop in a clearing amongst a dense bamboo forest that filled the area. As your sensei may have mentioned, I am Yuhi Kurenai. To start off, we'll begin with introductions. I'll go first. Kurenai stated as she turned to face them. My name is Yuhi Kurenai, but you can call me Kurenai-sensei. I like wine, gardening, and listening to classical music. I dislike sexism, arrogance, and criminals. My hobbies include wine tasting, spending time with my friends, and dancing. My dreams for the future are rather personal, so I'll refrain from telling you. Now, your turn. I'm Aburami Shinobu, the next in line to become the Aburami clan head. I like insects and reading. I dislike people who needlessly harm insects and loud noises. My hobbies include looking for new insects to introduce to my hive and spending time in my clan's gardens. As for my dreams for the future, I seek to surpass my father and become the strongest Aburami clan head. Shinobu responded calmly, her voice naturally soft and monotone. Kurenai then looked to Naruto, but Hayatari spoke up first. My name's Hyuga Hayatari and I'm the Hyuga heir. I like gardening and swimming. My dislikes include bullies and ignorant people. As a hobby, I like to make herbal remedies such as teas and ointments. My dreams for the future. Hayatari trailed off slightly before continuing. I wish to abolish the cage bird seal and unite the main and branch families of the Hyuga clan. Naruto was silent for several minutes, having not exactly been paying attention despite hearing everything. Glancing up at the others after a bit, Naruto realized that it was his turn. The first thing Kurenai noticed was the look on Naruto's face. He seemed lost. Not confused, but simply without anything to look forward to or even an idea of what to do next. The Hokage had told her what happened the other day. The young man was obviously hurting over the loss of his mother. She was honestly surprised he had even shown up to team assignments. Dinku Naruto. I have no reason to tell you my likes or dislikes, so I will not. The same goes for my hobbies and my dreams for the future. Was all Naruto said before turning his gaze back down to the ground, a constant expression of apathy and indifference on his face as he did so. Even as Kurenai went on to explain about the test she was going to give them tomorrow morning, Naruto became lost in thought. After losing his mother, that was all he really did. Think. He would think about everything from what shape his shadows made, what he would eat for dinner that night, and even the color of light reflecting off of his oily black skin. There was never any real path that his thoughts ran along now. It was almost like he was floating through a great void at times, aimlessly drifting with nothing in sight other than the complete darkness of the void itself. He had nothing to anchor his mind to, and it was troubling. He didn't like it. He needed to fix it, to change it somehow. But how? How could he change it if he had nothing to change it with, no way of changing his course or halting his progressive disappearance into the void? Naruto-san. Naruto-san, are you alright? Shinobu's voice suddenly cut into his thoughts. As his senses focused back on the world around him, Naruto realized he was lying on the ground. When did he fall? Or did he lie down? What exactly happened? Slowly sitting up, Naruto looked around at the others and found them giving him worried looks, his confusion clear to them, despite his lack of facial features to form solid expressions. You suddenly fainted just as Kurenai-sensei said we were free to go. I did. Naruto whispered, wondering if it hadn't been a void he saw a moment ago, but feeling himself fainting and falling over. It was possible. His senses and nervous system were far different than that of a normal person, and his endless thoughts could have possibly caused some kind of mental overload, resulting in him blacking out without warning. Slowly standing up, Naruto rubbed the back of his neck, still wearing a look of apathy on his featureless face. I apologize for worrying you. I'm fine. I'll see you all tomorrow morning. Shouldn't you go to the hospital? That's not exactly normal behavior, even for you, Naruto-san. Shinobu spoke up once more, but Naruto shook his head slightly. Shinobu-san, please make sure Naruto-san gets home. Kurenai's statement was cut short when Naruto let out a quiet breathy hiss, silencing her and startling everyone. I said I'm fine, he rasped out, letting out another hiss as he turned and started walking away. As he left, he was surprised with himself. Why was he getting so upset? They only wanted to help him. Then again, he didn't exactly have a home anymore. He never bothered checking out the apartment the Sandaime had helped set up for him. Naruto had come to find the Forest of Death more comfortable. No, that wasn't it. It felt natural for him. That's right, he didn't have a home anymore. He had a territory. Naru-chan, what's wrong? You're not acting like yourself. Tensei inquired worriedly, pulling her 8-year-old son in her lap as she sat down on his bed. After getting home from being at the academy, he just went straight to his room without saying a word. He never did that. Naruto said nothing as he leaned into his mother's embrace, his tail coiled around his waist to ensure it didn't get in the way. Come on, baby. Talk to me. Tensei urged in a soft whisper, gently kissing the side of Naruto's head. Sighing quietly, Naruto looked down at his mother's left hand, which was wrapped in bandages. Whenever I'm away from you I hear a voice in my head, he muttered, his words barely even heard by his mother. Her eyes widened slightly, but other than that, she didn't react, wanting him to explain as much as he could. You cut your hand while preparing dinner, didn't you? Yes, how did you know? Tensei asked softly with concern, gently adjusting her son's position so that he was sitting sideways before tenderly cupping his chin and making him look up at her. The first thing that worried her was the slight grimace on his face. As seemingly apathetic as he could appear to be around others, he was actually rather expressive whenever it was just the two of them. Well, being expressive for him went no further than a change in his tone or a partial expression on his face. A grimace, however, was something she rarely saw on his face. The voice in my head, it told me you were hurt, it told me you accidentally cut yourself. Slowly waking back up, Naruto could only stare up at the ceiling of rock above him, having taken shelter in a dark cave for the night. It was just like the other dreams he had been having since that night, bringing up memories of his childhood. The voice, though he hadn't heard it since his mother died. Now, roughly a month since that night, Naruto realized that it had been the voice in his head telling him that something was wrong that night, but his excitement from graduating to a genin had muted its cries. The emotions conveyed by the voice, however, were still communicated and spurred him to rush home. Even then, it was already too late. Hearing a deep growl off to the side, Naruto slowly turned his head to find a massive bear standing there on all fours, glowering at him fiercely. Slowly rolling over onto his hands and feet, Naruto stared at the bear, his face calm and apathetic while the mammal before him snarled ferociously. Not quite liking the blatant challenge over the ownership of the cave, Naruto curled his lips back and let out a loud hiss through his gnashed fangs, his tail curling up and appearing not unlike that of a scorpion's, as thick strings of saliva oozed from his parted lips and pooling lightly on the ground below him. Releasing a bellowing roar, the bear reared up on its hind legs, only for Naruto to lunge at it, tackling the beast onto its back and stabbing the bladed tip of his tail into its neck, the 2-foot-long onyx bone blade punching straight through and striking the stone floor of the cave. Withdrawing his tail, Naruto climbed off the beast before grabbing onto it and dragging it out of his new home. Hauling it a fair distance away, Naruto turned and walked back to his cave. Only the most foolish and arrogant of beasts in the forest of death dared to encroach on his territory amongst the wilderness. Every challenger's fate was always the same. Death. Naruto, ever vigilant when solitary, peered up at the sky through the gap in the canopy as he stood just feet away from the mouth of his new home. The sky was growing lighter, dawn. He would have to join his team soon. Sarutobi Hiruzen was silent as he mentally reviewed the message they received that morning. Before he could, teammate entered the room, obviously in search of another mission. Possibly even a second C rank since it had been almost a week since their first. Bringing up the rear was Naruto, and it spurned something in the old man. It had been a month and Naruto hadn't been acting like himself, still appearing lost. Maybe he could put those skills the boy possessed to good use and possibly change his mental state at the same time, but the second was a gamble. Well, in the words of my wayward student, high risk equals high reward. The Sarutobi thought to himself, only to recall that she was the worst gambler to ever exist. Teammate reporting, Hokage-sama. Kurenai began, glancing back at her students before facing the Sandaime again. If you don't mind, sir, I would like to request another C-rank mission for. I'll do you one better, A-rank. Sarutobi Hiruzen cut in abruptly, shocking them and the others in the room. A quick glance at Iruka and the other Chunin aiding him silenced each of them before they could argue his decision. He knew he was taking a huge risk sending a second genin team as reinforcements, but he didn't have any other teams on standby for it or couldn't risk taking too long. With teammates' arrival, Hiruzen decided to try his luck with two different gambles at the same time, providing aid for Team 7 and seeing if the mission would help snap Naruto out of the funk he'd been in recently, as understandable as it was. It seems the Kakashi and his students have gotten themselves into some trouble. I want you and your team to go to Wave Country, locate them, and provide backup. Kakashi will fill you in when you get there. You're to leave as soon as possible. Dismissed. Hi. Kurenai responded as she caught the scroll tossed to her by the Hokage, recompassing herself as she led two of her still stunned students out of the room, Naruto looking like he was thinking as he followed. She could only hope he didn't think too much. As bad as it sounded, it was true, Naruto had a tendency to think himself into fainting at random times. Once, it even happened in the middle of team training, almost resulting in his death if Hayatari hadn't forced himself to miss his target during their spar. This time, though Kurenai had a feeling it was a good thing that he was thinking with a purpose now and not as aimlessly as it appeared to be before. You heard him. You have 30 minutes to gather what you need and meet me at the south gate. Grab only the essentials like weaponry, medical supplies you think you'll need, field rations, the works. Now, go. Without a word, Shinobu and Hayatari took off down the hall, while Naruto made his way to a nearby open window, crawling out and scaling the wall all the way to the ground. Kurenai couldn't help shivering with slight fear, still mildly creeped out by Naruto's skills and appearance. He had finally told her everything he was capable of last week. What creeped her out, though, was the tongue thing, his acidic blood, and the fact he could cling to virtually any solid surface with the tiniest use of chakra that seemed almost non-existent. According to him, it was because he had trained so heavily in the tree climbing exercise that it was second nature for him now. In addition to everything, his natural stealthy qualities creeped her out a little bit as well. Like the fact that he didn't have an actual scent to his body and how he could sense virtually everything around him with incredible accuracy for a considerable range, his oily black skin giving him a natural camouflage that let him easily hide in dark places. She had seen firsthand just how good it was. During their first C-rank mission to clear out a couple dozen bandits from a small village, Naruto had seemingly disappeared when they set up camp outside of the village, not wanting to alert the bandits within the riverside town that shinobi were in the area. That night while they were coming up with a plan of action, they heard screaming. Lots of it. When they investigated, they came upon the sight of numerous dead bandits and arrived just in time to witness the death of the last one, who had managed to get a lucky shot in and cut a shallow gash across Naruto's chest with a katana. Highly acidic and highly pressurized blood shot out and sprayed the man's face and upper torso, burning and melting away his flesh, bones, and organs, but Naruto showed mercy and speared his tail blade through the man's neck. The entire time, she saw only that same lost look on his face, almost as if he was running autonomously. "You're only going to freak yourself out," Kurenai cut it out. "He's your student." Kurenai thought to herself before leaving the administration building herself. The trip was relatively short and like Kurenai predicted, Naruto suddenly disappeared the moment they reached Wave Country like he had done during their first C-rank mission. However, she had seen the subtle difference in his slight grimace compared to his others, his lip was curled slightly, bearing only a single fang pairing. It was difficult for them to read his surface thoughts via body language, mostly due to the lack of features on his face that would normally form a facial expression that only cut out half of her skill with reading people. She didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful of the change in him, though. Not long after reaching Wave Country, Shinobu and Hayatari were able to locate the home Kakashi and his team were staying in, thanks to their tracking skills. Even now, long after being briefed on what was going on and late into the night, there had been no sign of Naruto. He was simply nowhere to be seen. Little did she know, Naruto was going on the offensive, hunting down his prey with the intention of robbing them of ever seeing the rising sun again. HSSS hissing quietly, Naruto, who had stashed his hit I-8 in the pouch on his right leg for comfort and to remove any reflective surfaces, crouched down low to the ground on all fours, with his dorsal tubes fully extended as he examined the area. Kakashi had engaged a rogue Jounin hired to kill Team 7's client, letting everything swarm him, the scents, the sounds. The wind and grass touching his skin. It was difficult to distinguish either scent from one another, since he had no recollection of Kakashi's scent, and he had nothing of the rogue to use as a reference. It was even harder due to most of their lingering scent trails having been washed away by a great deal of water, and it had been almost a full 2 days since the fight. However, there was a third scent. A female. HSS hissing briefly, Naruto faced the direction the scent went in with the rogue Jounins. A moment later, he was mobile once again, following the scent trail as he ran. Coming to a stop in a nearby clearing, Naruto found the scent to be heavier in the area, probably from stopping for some reason for a brief time. Faintly smelling blood, Naruto followed it until he located a metal senbon with dried blood on it as it lay forgotten under some dead leaves. The scent of the blood matched the rogue Jounins. Committing it to memory, Naruto stashed the needle away in the pouch on his left leg before following the scent trail leading away from the clearing. It wasn't for another 30 minutes before Naruto reached his destination. So, this is where they are hiding, Naruto thought to himself, noticing that there was a light on in the suspended conical treehouse. Flattening himself as close to the ground as possible as he crawled forward, Naruto blended in perfectly with the darkness cloaking the forest. Reaching the base of the tree that the hideout had been built on, Naruto slowly began to scale the bark-covered surface, taking his time to make sure he didn't make a sound as he tensed the muscles in his back and extended his dorsal tubes, expanding his sensory range once more. 4 occupants. 3 male, 1 female. 2 males I suspect to be the demon brothers, sleeping in their room. The female and the other male are in another room. I also smell herbs medicine. Naruto noted in his mind, developing a plan. Transitioning from the tree to the building, Naruto crawled along the sloped surface to an opening in the roof, a window just barely big enough for him to squeeze through. After taking a moment to make sure there were no traps of any kind, Naruto lifted his left hand, folding down all of his fingers, save for his middle finger, before extending the slender claw from the tip of his finger with a hint of chakra, slipping it under the movable panel and reversing the latch, unlocking the window without making a sound. Opening the window and folding his dorsal tubes down, Naruto silently slithered inside, his dorsal tubes springing back up the moment he had enough room to. No one had moved. Deciding to remove the secondary threat first, Naruto made his way towards the room with the two males he suspected of being the demon brothers. Slipping inside without them waking, Naruto stepped between them while extending the claws on either hand with a hint of chakra, the obsidian talons lengthening to almost 3 inches each. Raising his hands, Naruto swung down and slit their throats simultaneously, their bloody gurgling being the only sound in the room, apart from the splattering of arterial spray, but the tailed shinobi had stepped back just in time to avoid being painted in the crimson fluid. Taking notice that the remaining male had fallen asleep in bed while the female that smelled of medicinal herbs was still awake and leaving the room, Naruto slipped out of the now deceased demon brother's room and climbed the wall of the corridor, clinging to the shadow-shrouded ceiling as he cautiously approached the young woman at a snail's pace. When he was above her, Naruto waited until she had moved past him before silently dropping down to the ground. Before she could react, Naruto tightly wrapped his right arm around her neck and covered her mouth with his left hand, his tail tightly coiling around her body to pin her arms to her side. She passed out from oxygen deprivation in under a minute after that. Easing her down, Naruto bound her with wire and for some unknown reason, he decided not to kill her like the other two. One left. Naruto thought to himself and started making his way to the room in question, only to squeeze his eyes shut again and wince, gripping his head with both hands as a new voice suddenly appeared in his head for the first time in a month, the volume of it reaching the equivalence of yelling. It wasn't so much that the voice spoke with words, but more like feelings, urges, instincts. Like someone using pictures to communicate. Letting out a rather loud hiss, Naruto reared up onto his legs alone. Wow, what the hell? Saint, stop talking to me. Shut up. The voice howled in his mind, making Naruto grow angry with it, but before he could try thinking of a way to silence it, the voice showed him something. It showed him a way to fill that empty space inside of him. It showed him how to get a new queen mother. Panting lightly as the voice quieted down, Naruto gazed down at the young woman's unconscious body, weighing his options as he pondered the knowledge that the voice had given him. Shaking his head slightly, Naruto focused back on the immediate threat. Hissing quietly, Naruto continued on with his self-appointed mission, quietly opening the door at the end of the hall and slinking inside. Nearing the bed, Naruto stared at the unconscious figure, Mamachi's Abusa, demon of the bloody mist and air Ankiri missing nin. Using his 2-foot-long tail blade, Naruto stabbed it into the man's chest, spearing his heart on the bone blade as he watched the man's eyes fly open before the light of life faded from them seconds later. The merciful and swift death, only without the mercy. Withdrawing his tail blade and cleaning it of the blood, Naruto formed the single hand seal he needed before two Kage Bunshin popped into existence on either side of him, both knowing their orders: dispose of the bodies. As one went to the demon brother's room and the other began to remove Zabuza from the bed, Naruto turned and walked back to the hall the female had been in. Kneeling beside her, Naruto brushed a strand of black hair from her face. Naruto maintained his vigilance as he examined her. Roughly 5'3" and appearing to be close to his own age, maybe a little older by a year or so, she had a lithe and natural hergless frame with an athletic build. Her hips filled out the waistband of her baggy brown pants, her thighs toned and muscular. Hidden beneath her baggy navy blue robe-like top that had been unknowingly parted during his ambush, she bore a slim waist and flat stomach, her firm and full-bodied cup breasts, tightly bound by a brown form-fitting turtleneck that hugged her torso like a second set of skin. Her blemish-free skin was a soft porcelain cream hue and as smooth as silk, her waist-length hair being raven black and glossy, an obvious sign of being well kept. Only one thing came to mind as he gazed down at her, gently brushing the back of his fingers across her cheek. "She'll make a perfect queen mother," he muttered softly, slowly folding his dorsal tubes flat against his back. Squeezing his eyes shut and wincing with discomfort, Naruto gripped the side of his head with one hand again, the voice slipping into his psyche once more, but it was quieter and calmer than before. It also felt like knowledge more than anything, but not it had before. It felt more natural. As if his instincts were manifesting themselves and subconsciously teaching him. Shaking his head slightly, Naruto could tell that it was definitely his instincts kicking in, something that was incredibly difficult for anyone to disobey. With him, it was even harder. Knowing it was best to follow his instincts than to fight them, Naruto recalled passing a cave that wasn't too far away. It would do perfectly for a temporary camp, of sorts. Gently picking the woman up bridal style, Naruto quickly left the hideout and headed for the cave. Upon arrival, Naruto nearly lost his balance as he became lightheaded again, another unprovoked dose of adrenaline flooding his circulatory system. Following the stone corridor all the way to the back, he discovered it to run quite deep before opening up into a large chamber, a pool of water lying near the back, as light filtered in through a small hole in the ceiling directly above it, being no more than a foot wide, maybe a little smaller. Laying her down, Naruto looked back to the doorway and formed a short string of hand seals before crouching down and planting his hands against the ground. Oten. Doryu Hiki. Naruto muttered, causing a small wall of stone to rise up and seal the entrance. Turning back to the young woman, Naruto slowly crouched down beside her before unbinding her arms and legs, moving them until they were stretched out away from her. From there, he followed the instructions he had been given by his instincts, focusing chakra into his throat and stomach, before eventually puking up a thick mucus-like slime that coated her arm from her palm to the middle of her forearm, the strange substance quickly hardening into a tough stone-like state that anchored her to the stone flooring. Doing the same for the rest of her limbs, Naruto tilted her head back slightly and opened her mouth. Hesitating for only a moment as he tried thinking of another option, Naruto found only one, but could he really go back to that endless void, that emptiness? Hissing quietly at the thought of it, Naruto focused chakra into his tongue like his instincts told him to, the muscle taking the form of the proboscis he previously lacked. Tweaking his jaw in discomfort from the awkwardness of his inner mouth resting in it, Naruto leaned down while holding the woman's jaw open, just in case she decided to bite down all of a sudden. Focusing his chakra in his throat and stomach again, only in a different manner, Naruto didn't waste time forcing the newly acquired proboscis down her throat and into her esophagus, only to puke up another kind of fluid, force-feeding her the thick and oddly sweet-tasting liquid. It was a special liquid that was normally only produced by a Xenomorph queen mother, being something akin to amniotic fluid from her egg sac. It was heavily laden with special hormones and biochemicals needed to promote certain forms of growth amongst xenomorphs, be they an egg waiting to be laid or a xenomorph molting into a new queen mother to replace the fallen one. It was also extremely rich in nutrients they needed for healthy development. To humans, however, it had a very potent drug-like effect on their minds, warping their thoughts and leaving them in a trance-like daze filled with euphoric sensations. For what he had planned for her, though, she would be experiencing both sides of the same coin. He wasn't sure how he knew everything, but Naruto didn't exactly care at the moment. His mind was focused solely on turning the young woman into a queen mother, a hybrid like himself. He didn't know how or why, but he possessed a small amount of venom, per se. It was secreted from his second set of slightly smaller fangs and, according to his instincts, it was capable of mutating the target injected with it, automatically splicing its DNA with that of a xenomorph. Theorizing that it was a side effect of what had been done to him, Naruto thought nothing more on the matter as he finished pumping what he felt was almost a gallon of the nutrient-rich fluid into her now distended stomach. His proboscis shifting back into a tongue as he cut off the chakra flow to it. NGH groaning quietly, Haku slowly started to stir from her sleep by the painful tightness in her stomach, only to recall the events that had happened prior to passing out. Eyes going wide as she stared up at the strange creature looming over her, Haku tried to move, only to find her arms and legs bound. Before she could truly panic, however, the drug-like effects of the fluid she'd been pumped full of began to take hold, her eyes becoming unfocused and half-lidded as her body relaxed against her will. All she could manage was another groan of discomfort from how full her stomach was, sluggishly writhing on the ground despite her inability to move. "What is your name?" Naruto asked a tad sternly as he held the young woman by her jaw, forcing her to focus her attention on him as best as she could. He could tell she heard him, but she was heavily addled by the fluid's effects on her mind. "Your name. What is it?" "Ah Haku," she mumbled out before a quiet moan slipped out of her, fruitlessly trying to free her legs in her weakened state. However, still being in physical contact with her, Naruto could practically taste the pheromone she was releasing as she started feeling the full effect of the fluid. She was aroused. Heavily so. He could also detect some other hormonal markers, one he could only identify as her body readying itself for reproduction. An unexpected side effect, but one he welcomed, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips as he leaned down. Tilting her head to the side, Naruto first cut the shoulder seam of her top with a claw to expose the flesh of her shoulder before parting his jaws. A pained gasp escaped Haku as she grimaced and squirmed under him as his fangs dug into the flesh on her shoulder at the base of her neck. As a black fluid visibly passed through his smaller translucent fangs, Haku's eyes went wide, while her pupils dilated more than what they already were, the black dots taking up most of her iris as her eyes became half-lidded once more. Releasing her shoulder and licking the few drops of blood from his lips, Naruto watched as the veins around the bite started turning black, the venom instantly going to work on her body. Wanting to watch the process firsthand out of sheer curiosity, Naruto undid Haku's robe top before using a claw to cut through her turtleneck top straight down the middle. By the time he had parted her now ruined turtleneck, the black veins had already spread down the left side of her chest and over towards the right side. Back near the bite, her skin started turning an oily black not unlike his own, the process steadily spreading across the rest of her body. He grimaced slightly as the skin on her head turned black before her hair seemed to fall out, while her face seemed to shift and flatten out, turning out almost exactly like his own in appearance. Except, she developed a slightly more elegant-looking carapace on her head that flared out a little more than his own, a queen mother's carapace, he reasoned. It was a morbid sight, he admitted to himself, but he was still intrigued to watch as her arms and legs gradually transformed into those similar to his own. It was truly fascinating to him, unable to tell if she felt any sort of pain. She didn't seem like it, but he didn't know for sure. As her feet started to change, however, Naruto was forced to break apart the resin-like material covering her ankles so that the bones could shrink and grow freely. Idly wondering how her body was able to do such a thing, Naruto was pulled from his thoughts on it by something changing on her torso. Parting her ruined top more, Naruto watched as the second pair of breasts started to develop on her body just beneath her original pair. It started with the forming of her new nipples before the flesh around them began to plumpen and swell, taking only a handful of seconds before they matched her original pair in size and shape. This is truly incredible. He mused while lightly dragging a single claw along the very edge of the black areola surrounding one of Haku's newly formed nipples. Instantly, Haku let out a soft gasping hiss of pleasure as she inhaled deeply, arching her back slightly to thrust her chest out a little more as her nipples stiffened from the stimulation. Noticing something else, however, Naruto focused his attention lower on her torso, watching as her lower abdomen bulged slightly, her stomach having gradually shrunk back down as the fluid he'd force-fed her was absorbed and used to fuel her transformation. Hearing a slight tearing noise, his attention was drawn even lower as a tail like his own began to grow from the base of her spine underneath her, the prehensile extra limb armed with its own bone-like blade at the tip. Unlike his, though, Haku's had a slight hook to it, the curved bone blade being a little longer than his as well by about 6 inches or so, while her tail itself was almost a foot longer than his own. "I knew you'd make a beautiful queen mother," Naruto whispered as he lightly ran a claw along Haku's jawline, something that made the newly transformed hybridized woman moan quietly, writhing again in euphoria from the drug-like trance she had been in and the sensual stimulation. He was caught off guard, however, when Haku's tail blade hooked itself around the back of his neck before pulling him down over her again, her lips instantly connecting with his. Before he could try to pull back, Haku had already forced her tongue into his mouth, rubbing the oral muscle against his own as she tried shifting her position so that Naruto was situated between her legs. If he'd had eyes, Naruto was certain they'd be rolling back in his head at the moment as he shivered slightly, every last bit of his omniscient senses clouded with a haze of lust caused by the powerful pheromones wafting off of Haku's new body, Xenomorph-based pheromones that made it incredibly difficult for him to think about anything other than mating with a beautiful, breeding-ready female underneath him. Lips breaking contact for a moment to catch their breath, a thin string of sticky saliva connected their mouths as Naruto let out a quiet breathy hiss before Haku nudged his cheek slightly. Feeling her finally slip her leg around him and hook it around his waist, Naruto let her pull him closer to her until he was lying on top of her. As a long and drawn-out hiss escaped him, Naruto knew he couldn't resist any longer. Now that they had established even more skin-to-skin contact, the pheromones she was giving off were too much for him, intoxicating every breath he took and soaking into his skin. He could taste her arousal, he could smell her lust. She knew by instinct that she was extremely fertile and she wasn't going to let up until she had been mated. With what little human-like logic he could muster up, Naruto could only assume she had given in to the drug-like fluid's effects and the transformation. Her body operating solely on her xenomorph-like instincts now as her human mind was gnawed away by the fluid's effects and his pseudo-venom's genetic manipulations. HSS hissing quietly, Haku slowly licked the side of his neck as she locked her legs behind his waist, grinding her hips against his as she continuously tried to encourage him into mounting her. Shivering once more as he realized that even her saliva was heavily laden with her pheromones, Naruto continued struggling against his instincts, against his otherworldly half-natural desires. His resistance didn't last much longer, however, as Haku hissed quietly next to his head again while using her tail blade to pry at the resin binding her arms, easily breaking the tough biological material. Hands now free, Haku looped one arm around Naruto's neck to pull him into another kiss, while her other lightly clawed at the suffocating fabric still covering her lower half, tearing small holes in it with her claws. She was desperate for a mate, and her only option was the specimen currently on top of her, one that was quite happy with. Grinding against him with a quiet and pleading moan, Haku started salivating even more, the clear and sticky fluid quickly entering Naruto's bloodstream through his own mouth as she started fumbling with the male's own clothing. Finally unable to keep up the fight, Naruto's xenomorph instincts took full control as he broke the lip lock, hissing a little louder than before as he used a clawed hand to undo his pants. Satisfied with his willingness to copulate, Haku slid her legs off of him so that he could shed the annoying cloth covering his lower half while she simply dug her claws into her own leggings, tearing them in a desperate attempt to expose herself to him. Binding her wrists together with his tail after shedding his clothes, Naruto captured her lips in a heated tongue-filled kiss while grabbing the ripped remnants of her pants, tearing them off in a single sharp pull before haphazardly tossing the ruined article of clothing aside. Feeling him penetrate her, Haku broke the kiss with a soft moan that turned into a pleasured hiss, only to gasp slightly and thrust her chest out further as her new mate started to suckle one of her breasts. Holding the back of his head against her bosom with her tail, Haku's back arched even more as her mate started thrusting into her head tilting back with euphoria. Just from his grip on her body and how he became far more dominating of her, Haku was certain her first brood would be strong and healthy, offspring worthy of being sired by such a promising mate. He had the scent of a king father, after all, and she was to be his queen mother. Her womb was already engorged with countless eggs ready for fertilization, and from his girth and length, Haku had no doubts in his virility and the potency of his seed. Feeling a hand roughly grip her rear and thigh to the point that his claws were pressing into her flesh, Haku let out a moan-like cry reminiscent of a shriek, the queen mother fighting against his tail for a moment before finally freeing her hands, only to use them to cling to her mate as her core became knotted up and heated. Feeling his member thicken inside of her, Haku bucked her hips as best as she could amongst her orgasmic body spasms, before feeling the king father's seed flood her womb, another shrieking cry of ecstasy escaping her as she threw her head back, her spine arched heavily. Collapsing back to the ground limply, Haku panted heavily to refill her lungs as her life mate slowed in his thrusting, but didn't stop. Sensually caressing the side of his head and neck, Haku forced her tongue into his mouth again, her legs weak and shaky, but refusing to release the gorgeous and fertile male she was interlocked with. Breaking the kiss with a sharp gasp, Haku could only writhe in ecstasy as her mate's thrusting picked up in pace and power once more, his members still fully rigid inside of her. Her body was so confident, in fact, that her reproductive organs expelled even more embryos into her enlarged womb, her body automatically reacting to her mate's potent seed. Oh, yes, her first brood was most definitely going to be strong and healthy. Only the strongest would make do for her king father, her life mate. While the cave blocked out almost all light from the outside world, Naruto still stirred as the sun started pulling away from the horizon. To others, he would seem to be an earlier riser, but he had actually slept in, by his own standards, since he normally woke up with the very first rays of dawn's light. Beside him, Haku was still slumbering peacefully, curled around her large and bloated womb protectively. In only a handful of hours, she had gone from being only slightly puffy in her lower abdomen to looking as if she was on the verge of being considered overdue with quintuplets. Not only that, but her four breasts had plumped up into what he guessed to be solid E-cups. Each one swollen with the same fluid he had pumped her stomach full of last night. Idly, he knew he should give the fluid a name of some kind, instead of just calling it fluid, but he dismissed the thought for a later date. Gently placing a 6-digit hand on the side of her belly, Naruto focused before feeling the sluggish squirming of his serpentine offspring inside of her, the surface of her taut skin writhing and wriggling with their movements inside of her overpacked womb. Knowing she would be giving birth soon, Naruto slowly stood from his spot beside her before moving to the pool of water, intending to clean himself up a little after their lengthy activities last night. He guessed that she would be ready to give birth in a few more hours if her rate of growth was anything to go by, meaning he would have to find food for their young. In the back of his mind, he knew he should return to his team and let them know about the main threat to their client being done away with, but… HSS hissing quietly as he looked back over at Haku, the male hybrid grimaced slightly, he wasn't willing to part with her. He never had any intentions of parting with her, but even for a short time, he wasn't willing. He wasn't going to risk leaving her unguarded. He wasn't going to let another queen mother be stolen from him. She was his. And he will kill anyone that threatens to take her away from him. Stepping out of the chilled waters and letting himself air dry, Naruto suddenly thought of his last queen mother, the one that had raised him to be human. Would she be disappointed in me? Or happy for me? Naruto thought to himself as he froze in place, a quiet hiss escaping him as he shook faintly. He knew that his method of acquiring his new queen mother was morally and ethically wrong in the eyes of most others, but he wouldn't change anything he had done. He was just doing what his instincts drove him to do, doing only what was in his nature as a xenomorph, hybrid or not. Clenching his fists and gnashing his fangs, Naruto shook his head to clear it. He couldn't worry about that anymore. Sadly, she was gone. He had to focus on caring for the queen mother he had now, not the one he had before. He would never forget about Tensei and what she had done for him, but he had more pressing concerns to deal with now. Quickly dressing himself as he forced such thoughts out of his head, Naruto went back to Haku, laying down in front of her for a moment. HSS letting out a quiet hiss as she woke up for a moment, Haku reached over and brushed the back of her clawed fingers along his cheek, making Naruto lean into her touch slightly as a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. She was happy and content, something that pleased him greatly. Leaning closer to her while placing a hand on her nearly overburdened womb, Naruto gently kissed her while soothingly rubbing her belly, an odd purring sound emanating from her throat and chest as she relaxed, even the restless brood she carried seeming to calm down inside of her. "I'll be back. I promise," he whispered softly before kissing her one last time and getting up again. As he walked away and broke part of the earthen wall he had erected last night, Haku watched him leave, even as slumber pulled at her consciousness once more. "Bro my," she whispered out slowly and quietly, her body curling around her womb more snugly as a drowsy smile formed on her lips, her tail curling around in front of her and over her head. Sealing the wall back up, Naruto turned and started walking again, his claws flexing slightly as he extended his dorsal tubes. He didn't have a whole lot of time to find enough food for his carnivorous young. If they were anything like him, only meat would satisfy their hunger, raw, bloody meat fresh from the carcass. Seeing as Wave Country was a small island nation, he didn't have much hope in finding enough wild game for his young. However, there was a certain infestation on the island that had been causing the islanders some serious problems. Snarling slightly as he fully exited the cavern's entranceway, Naruto darted off to the hideout his queen mother had been living in just the day before. Taking only about 10 to 15 minutes to reach the conical tree-side building, Naruto started searching for any unfamiliar scents that didn't belong to Haku, the deceased demon brothers, or the deceased demon of the Bloody Mist. Finding a couple that were grouped close together, Naruto made sure it wasn't leading back in the direction he had come from before running deeper into the forest, following the scent trails. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.